Okay, so part of the Plyometric series, that was a kettlebell swing, and what I got over here is my whiteboard. So a couple of things to remember: it is a full body exercise, but you do have like your main activating like muscles, even if it is a compound work exercise. So we've got the main muscles, what's driving it: glutes, muscles of the hip complex. What's assisting: abs, back and shoulder. Too many times you see too many people like overloading on these areas specifically, like they're using too much of their shoulder to raise it up, and they'll come into an issue I'll bring up a little bit down. Also with their back rounding too much, I'm not able to keep it in neutral. So there's a couple little things you should consider doing before you attempt to do a kettlebell swing. Just remember, it is a hip driving movement first and foremost. So it does come from the glutes first. Even though it is full body, you should learn to do a hip hinge, which I've got down here. What needs to be done before you master the kettlebell swing? So hip flexion extension. So that's being able to flex at the hip and then extend up. Being able to like keep neutral spine while doing that without having to round your back too much. You want to master that type of movement before you start getting into the swings. You want to at least hold a plank for 30 seconds plus, because you're going to need core stability when your glutes start to fatigue, or if you're overloading your back and abs too much, they're not going to hold. So you need to have core stability. So like holding for a minimum of 30 seconds to a minute in a plank, and then you should be good to work for a kettlebell swing, engaging your core the whole time. Relative flexibility for your hamstrings, so very common in runners or in anyone who does a lot of biking or any triathlons, quite jacked up in the hamstrings. What happens there is when your hamstrings are quite jacked, you start to tilt your hips a little bit, and you won't get full extension or full flexion for the foremost when you go to swing. So you want full flexion and extension. So that's why I like say about relative flexibility through those movements of hinging and then coming back up into extension. So you want to make sure that your hamstrings are pretty loose. Can squat, seat depth. So learning to squat is probably pretty important first. Probably learn to squat seat depth and then coming back up. You don't need to worry about going too low, because with the kettlebell swing you do not want to go too low. Like in my demonstration, it's keeping close to your hips more than anything. So the kettlebell shouldn't drop too far below your knees. If anything, it shouldn't touch the ground, just like it shouldn't exceed where your shoulder comes out to here. So I shouldn't be able to lift up to here. There is a shoulder swing movement that's totally different thing altogether. What we're talking about is a kettlebell swing in a plyometric kind of environment. You're just going through your hips, so you want to keep the drive from your hips, stability for your shoulder, so you're only coming up to here. So squat depth, you want to make sure that getting to like seat level, can easily hip thrust the weight you're trying to swing. So this one's pretty important. If you're trying to kettlebell swing like 30 kilos, then technically you should be able to do a hip thrust and extend your hips up with 30 kilos on a barbell, or like 30 kilo barbell itself. If you can't do that and you can't extend your hips up into like neutral spine, then you probably shouldn't start to swing too heavy. Like regress the weight into something that you can extend your hips up in a hip thrust. But yeah, kettlebell is really popular, especially this time of year with plyometrics and stuff. So it is pretty important to do it properly. So main points: learn to squat, core stability, so do planks, loosen through your hips and your hamstrings, and you want to be able to like hinge through the hips and be able to have some mobility for your knees and ankles. But just remember, the kettlebell swing isn't a squat, it's a swing itself. So you're only going so far down, just past your knees, and then coming up. You shouldn't have the kettlebell brushing the ground. But yeah, it's one I do see often being taught incorrectly or like being used incorrectly. Just remember the biggest thing, you're using your hips to drive it. So glutes, 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 glutes. You should feel your glutes when you go to thrust it up. You squeeze your glutes and then release them back down, and just constantly working for your glutes. The rest of the muscles are just stabilizing. it shouldn't be overloading on the shoulders. Cool. So that's the kettlebell swing part of the plyometric series. I'll start adding more type of weighted exercises with the plyometric stuff. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful.